1, 2, 3, 4.
Good morning, everybody. This is Jewish Talk on the voice of NASA Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Streaming live on the college station and on TuneIn.com and on the iHeartRadio app. And all week long, you can find this program reposted on Spreaker.com. And don't forget, right now, we can be seen on Facebook Live. Hello, everybody. Just join us, say hello, post something. We'll be happy to respond. And I am Rabbi Pearl, and today we're going to look at silence. Now, I'm going to spend the next half an hour in silence. That'll be a great program. I mean, finally, I'll be saying something that really makes sense. But what is the significance of silence and finding moments of silence? First of all, I'm going to give it a historical perspective. When God gave the Jewish people the Torah at Mount Sinai, we are told that the entire world became silent. The wind stopped blowing, no animals made a sound, and every human being stopped speaking. Why? Was God afraid that we wouldn't be able to hear his voice? Surely he could have caused his voice to resonate over all the natural sounds of the world and would not have made a great impression. So think about this. Why was this be? Why was it all in silence? I want to say a special hello to the Kilshevskys. They are watching from Connecticut. Hello to Abner Zarabi. Wow, Abner, thank you so much. Inshallah. And everybody out there, please post your comments. We will try to address them. So our discussion today is all about the power of silence. And we're saying that when the Jewish people received the Torah at Mount Sinai on the holiday of Shavuos, which is coming up on Sunday, May 19th and 20th, or 20 and 21st, Sunday and Monday, God silenced the noise so we could hear the voice within ourselves. The voice that longed for a spiritual connection. The voice that longed for this Torah. And that's our discussion. We are constantly bombarded with distractions. Silencing it all, even momentarily, becomes nearly impossible. You know, I once asked a student who was feeling stressed out to take a minute that week to stop and think about nothing. Just take a minute of meditation and silence. She couldn't do it. Why? Because the distractions are too great in our lives. So, as we prepare for the holiday of Shavuos, coming up in 2 weeks, we're finding out that Judaism is not just simply a religion, it's a relationship. And therefore, through the silence at Mount Sinai, God was showing us a key to maintaining our relationship with Him, and our relationship with others, and also our relationship within ourselves. Listen to the inner voice of one's soul that quietly urges us to connect. Let me share with you what I read about from a best-selling author and psychologist, John Gottman. He created a study that observed couples interacting in their natural setting. After 1 week of observation, Gottman was able to determine which couples would divorce and which would stay married with 94% accuracy. The arguments about finances or kids were irrelevant to his predictions. The key was whether or not the couple turned toward what he called each other's bid for attention. For example, a couple is sitting at the breakfast table while the husband is looking at his iPhone, like what else is new. His wife gazes out the window and suddenly turns to him and says, "Look, honey, a hummingbird. It's gorgeous." At that moment, the husband has a choice. Will he look up at his wife or continue to look down at his phone? Wow. Choosing to silence his distraction, look up, acknowledge his wife, and enjoy this small moment together nurtures her need for closeness and connection. The hummingbird is irrelevant. He is turning towards her bid for attention. And a special thank you to Jean. One of Jean on our Facebook Live posting says, one of the best ways to get someone's attention is to be silent. Oh my goodness, we're going to soon talk about that. And good morning to the Professor Shaw. We're going to talk about this moment, what they call the silent treatment. Anyway, let's back to this professor. Dr. Gottman explains, that each time we answer another's bid, it's an opportunity for closeness. When we ignore the bid and continue to be distracted, guess what? We lose the opportunity for closeness. This is true of all relationships. Distractions are innocuous things that can hold big consequences. How often have we promised ourselves that when our kids get home from school, we will keep our phone off until they go to sleep? A nächtige Tag. Inevitably, the device gets pulled out because we have to look up a recipe, or a child wants to use the phone to call a friend. The next thing we know, we're answering all the texts and the emails and ignoring the kids. Silence stops everything, enables us to think, to make good decisions that allow us to connect. Now, as I mentioned, this coming May 20th and 21st, Sunday, Monday, 2 weeks from now, Shavuos is the holiday when the Torah was given to us. This is a time where we tap into the power of silencing distractions in order to connect. And therefore, at this stage, I'd like to say, may the Almighty give us the strength to sit in silence and listen to our gentle inner voice so that we can make good decisions and forge our best personal path in life. So let me delve into this a little bit deeper. There's a teaching from the ethics of the fathers. All my days, these are the words, all my days I grew up among the sages and did not find anything better for the body than silence. We all know that a human being is described as being a medaber, a speaker. The ability to communicate is central to being a human being. Speech allows us to express our feelings, develop our emotions, explain concepts, to give over stupid jokes, influence other people, and strengthen our relationships. So why then would the sages suggest that silence is a value worth pursuing? Isn't silence the absence of speech? The answer lies in its definition. There are two forms of silence. One is just the absence of words, and the other one is required as a foundation of effective speech. Let me explain. Silence, when timed correctly, is a language of connection. The first silence is a negative trait that stems from the inability or unwillingness to communicate effectively. This silence, unlike speech, guess what? Can cause division and separation. It can create dysfunction in a human relationship. Let me give you some examples. You get upset and you give someone the silent treatment, as Gene likes to say. I want to say a special hello to Devora Hazelwood. Thank you. As you may know, we're heard all over the world on the radio, online, and on Facebook Live at Rabbi Pearl. Facebook /Rabbi Pearl. And you can see us right here, and I can wave to you. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jonathan Wolf, all the way from New Jersey. Yes, indeed, as we will explain, that being able to speak is a very creative power. So, getting upset and giving someone the silent treatment when we're offended or hurt, respectful conversation is the only tool to resolve issues and repair relationships. If you don't talk, no one's going to say anything. Remaining silent and refusing to talk is a form of aggression, and let me tell you, it's totally ineffective. A parent who's afraid of his or her children and cannot be assertive with appropriate guidance and direction, boy, this is a silence that comes from weakness and leads to dysfunctional behavior. But here's the second. The second, there is a good silence that creates a platform for effective and positive speech. It allows the goals of communications to be achieved. Because true communication can only occur when there is a mutual understanding and a deep respect for each other's position. For this to take place, our words must be preceded and guided by the appropriate silence. This means, in simple terms, what would we mean? Waiting to respond so that we can think before we talk, rather than speak impulsively. How many times did my teacher tell me, Anshul, think before you talk, right? Be quiet. Waiting to respond so that we can think before we talk, rather than just blurting it out. To actively listen to someone else without interrupting them so that we can really understand their perspective and they can feel that they're being heard. So listen. Don't just jump. Be quiet. Silence before you talk. Creating boundaries around our words so that we can carefully choose words that will bring us closer together. And remaining silent when they can create more distance. It is this form of silence that the sage is referring to. Before we can be true to our identity as speakers and communicators, we must learn the art of good silence. Yeah, you got to know when to keep quiet. Being quiet when we should talk creates dysfunction and disunity amongst us. But silence, when timed correctly, is the language of connection. Do you remember that wonderful student down in Florida after the terrible event in Parkland in that high school, terrible shooting, and 17 wonderful people lost their lives? And when this young lady got up to speak, she spoke and remained silent for 6.5 minutes. Everybody said, what's wrong with her? What's wrong with her? But she was bringing up a point. Then those 6.5 minutes, that was enough time for that killer to destroy all that life. Silence, if it's said, done, and used properly, can be an amazing language of connecting people. I want to say, Dorothy Rustin always likes to say, Dorothy Rustin comes all the way from the Bronx. Thank you so much for listening from the Bronx, Dorothy. Loose lips sink ships. That's an old wartime call. Thank you very much for bringing us back to that time. And Joanne Brandenstein says, often when I'm silent, the answer to a problem seems to pop into my head. Sometimes we just have to keep our mouths closed and think before we speak. The wise King Solomon teaches us, Eis ladaber, eis lachshos. There's times to be silent and a time to speak. The challenge in implementing this clever advice is to know when to do what. It isn't always easy to know when to speak and when to be quiet. Now, the question we must ask ourselves, is there a guiding principle that teaches us when to open our mouth and when not to? Well, I would suggest as a rabbi that when it comes time to make a speech in this sermon in the synagogue, rabbis should take this guiding principle and keep their mouths shut, because I think you could have a much happier congregation. Just don't get nervous, everybody. Having some good time over here. So, is there a guiding principle of when to speak and when not to? So I'm going to give you two opposite pieces of advice that we find in the Talmud. Interesting. When it's good to speak and when it's time to shut up and keep your mouth closed. And here's number one. Talmud tells us, always be the first to greet every person. When you see someone, it is considered praiseworthy to initiate the greeting. Elsewhere, the sages teach us, he who rushes to say shalom, to say welcome to his friend, is blessed with a long life. So clearly the Talmud telling us, be the first to open your mouth and say hello, welcome someone. Someone walks into the synagogue, comes into your house, go over and say shalom aleichem, welcome them. Okay, now we find the opposite. We are told in the Talmud, it's forbidden to start speaking until the mourner initiates the conversation. So, there's a rule, there's a law. If you want to fulfill the mitzvah of comforting a mourner, you're making a shiva call, bishva. Someone has lost a loved one, and you're there to offer words of comfort. The Talmud tells us, we are advised to come into the house and say nothing until the bereaved starts speaking. They have to start up talking. They have to create the conversation. The basis of any conversation must consider the needs of whom we are talking of. So if we examine the goal of communication, we will appreciate that it is the same principle that lies at the both of these instructions. And clearly there is a time to be the first to talk, and there is a time to be the last to talk. Let me explain. Speech is not just about broadcasting what's hidden in our thoughts. Communication is about the ability to connect to another human being. It's about bringing two worlds closer to each other to create a deeper and stronger bond. Speech is about sharing emotions, explaining concepts, and strengthening relationships. So, the basis of any conversation, therefore, must consider the needs of the one you're talking to. Anytime we speak, we must be sensitive to the other person's situation and feelings to ensure that the conversation will indeed bring us closer together and make that relationship stronger. Rushing in, so if a person comes into your house or into your synagogue, you rush to say hello. Why? Because that's a way of saying, I'm happy to see you. In this case,